They thought I wouldn't wake up. While I lay unconscious, my children stood in a hospital cafeteria and divided my life like scavengers picking through remains. But I did wake up, and the moment I heard what they said, I rewrote everything and left it to someone they never saw coming. The wind had been howling since before dawn, sliding against the windows of my old cedar home like a restless ghost. It was the kind of coastal storm the Pacific Northwest is known for. Gray skies weeping and branches bowing like mourners. I watched the trees from the bay window of the parlor, the air cold enough to turn breath into mist. My body, stiff with age and apprehension, echoed that same ache. Old, worn, and bracing for impact. A week ago, my doctor had used words like complications, arterial blockage, and we need to operate soon. At 67, surgery wasn't just a medical procedure, it was a gamble. They said it was necessary, urgent even, but all I heard was the tightening tick of a clock I didn't control. I hadn't told Devlin or Sloan the full extent of it. What would be the point? Their responses had always been polite, composed, and hollow, like echoes in a vast, indifferent hall. I'd spent years convincing myself that silence from my children was normal. That love from them came quietly, modestly, behind text messages and obligatory phone calls. But now, on the edge of something final, the void was louder than ever. I didn't always feel like a ghost in my own house. Once, this place had been alive, filled with birthday banners, spilled juice boxes, and the chaos of motherhood. I'd made pancakes shaped like animals, stitched Halloween costumes late into the night, kissed every scrape and tear. I gave them my back, my sleep, my dreams. I gave them my everything. Now I felt like furniture they occasionally dusted with a visit. It was the kind of silence that comes after a life of giving, where no one thinks to ask if you're tired, because you were always the strong one, the dependable one, the background character in your own story. But behind all my strength was a woman carved hollow by years of small dismissals and large sacrifices. I'd loved their father once. Paul was charming when he needed to be, strategic when it mattered, and cold in ways that made you question yourself instead of him. He didn't raise his hand, no, he raised his expectations. I was a good wife, a devoted mother, and in his eyes, that meant invisible. I gave and gave and gave, thinking love would return in kind. It never did. And when he passed 10 years ago, it left behind not grief, but a kind of empty permission to finally breathe. Still, I stayed. I stayed in the house, in the role, in the shadows of expectation. Because a woman like me doesn't learn rebellion in her 60s. We learn submission young, and we wear it like a badge. I taught my children loyalty, but forgot to teach them empathy. I nurtured their needs and buried mine so deep I forgot what they were. What happens to a woman who can't name her desires? I pressed my hand to the cold glass of the window. The storm outside was only just beginning, but inside, it had been brewing for years. The walls knew things I hadn't spoken aloud. The bedroom held a kind of loneliness that even sleep couldn't drown. And the kitchen, God, the kitchen, had become a place where laughter used to live. Now it was just me and the clink of my spoon in a single teacup. In the hallway, their childhood photos still hung. Devlin, age 10, with a plastic gold medal hanging from his neck. Always proud, always first. Sloan, 7, dressed in ballet tights, gazed just to the left of the camera, already elusive. My heart swelled and ached simultaneously. I loved them with a ferocity that hadn't dimmed, even if their love had grown conditional. I'd always made excuses for them. They're busy, they have their own lives, but sometimes excuses are just denial in better clothes, and denial had kept me warm at night when no one else called. I shuffled toward the study, feeling the weight of my own fragility in my knees. The will was still there, resting atop the mahogany drawer where I kept the original. Cream paper, thick and formal, with ink signatures and legal flourishes. When I first drafted it 5 years ago, it felt right. Simple, split evenly, no drama. I thought it would be a comfort to them someday. But something had shifted recently, something I couldn't yet name. The storm's whistle grew louder, as if pushing something into my ears I didn't want to hear. I was about to turn on the radio to drown it out when I heard voices, Devlin and Sloan downstairs. I hadn't even known they'd arrived. I stilled, not from fear, but from the strange instinct that I shouldn't be seen just yet. I'm telling you, if she goes under and doesn't come out, we need to be ready, Devlin said. His voice was clipped, impatient. Sloane replied, "She won't even notice. She hasn't updated that thing in years. We're both in there, 50-50." Devlin snorted. "And what if she changes it? You think she wouldn't? She's been weird lately." A pause. "Are you seriously worried she'll leave it to someone else?" "I'm saying we can't be stupid. She's been hanging around that friend of hers, Clara. You don't think Clara's whispering in her ear?" My breath caught. I backed away from the stairwell like it had burned me. There it was, the truth. Stripped of affection, bare in its intention. They weren't grieving me. They were anticipating my death like a banker awaiting a transaction. In that moment, something inside me broke, and something else formed in its place. Cold, sharp, and unsentimental. I returned to the study. My eyes landed on the will, still there, untouched, but no longer a comfort. It looked different now. It looked like a loaded weapon. The overhead lights in the hospital pulsed sterile white. Cold, clinical, designed to disorient and comfort all at once like a lie told with a gentle tone. I lay beneath one of them, stripped of everything but a thin gown and a thin thread of courage. Machines beeped steadily around me. A nurse moved quietly at my side, adjusting the IV as if she were tending to a dying orchid. Delicate hands, professional detachment. "You'll be okay," she whispered. Her eyes were kind but distant, the sort of kindness you learn to give when you've watched too many good people fade away. I nodded, but my throat was dry. I wanted to believe her, but even if the surgery went well, something inside me had already begun to rot. Trust, love, that aching dream that family means safety. I turned my head toward the white-tiled wall and closed my eyes. The present blurred. Memory took over, soft-edged but sharp where it counted. Devlin, age 16, demanding a car for his birthday. Not asking, demanding. He said it was what other guys got, what he deserved. When I suggested something modest, he stormed upstairs, slamming every door in the hallway. The next morning, he didn't speak to me. Not until Paul bought him the convertible just to shut him up. Sloane, in her early 20s, always so polished, so poised. She brought me flowers on Mother's Day and sent me scented candles for Christmas. But it was all surface, like a receptionist's smile. Behind it lived something cool and strategic. She once told me over brunch, "Love is currency, Mom. You trade it, not just give it." I laughed at the time, but my hands trembled for the rest of the day. Their love wasn't unconditional. It was calculated, a ledger of effort and expectation. And for years, I had been paying interest on a loan that should have been a gift. Even now, beneath the hospital lights, I couldn't stop replaying every small dismissal. Devlin forgetting my birthday. Sloane mocking my fear of flying. The way both of them made decisions for me, not with me. Telling, not asking. Like I was a relic, some living heirloom they didn't know what to do with yet. Their father taught them that. Paul was never overtly cruel. That wasn't his style. His control came in size, raised eyebrows, and the sharp blade of indifference. I once cried in front of him, telling him I felt alone in our marriage. He handed me a tissue and said, "You're too emotional, Diane. You need to learn to self-regulate." Self-regulate, like I was a thermostat. The anesthesiologist entered, clipboard in hand. He asked me to count backward from 10. I barely made it to 7 before the room fell into itself. Somewhere else, not far, in the linoleum-lit cafeteria downstairs, my children were having a very different kind of moment. "I'm telling you, if she croaks, I want the beach house," Devlin snapped, jabbing a plastic fork into a slice of cafeteria lasagna. Sloane rolled her eyes. "You never even visit her. Don't make this about sentiment. You just want to rent it out for the summer." "It's called passive income, Sloane. Not that you'd know anything about that with your little art consulting gig." "My gig brings in more than your crypto pipe dreams. Don't act like you're smarter just because you talk louder." They didn't notice the nurse at the table behind them, Leah, early 30s, observant. She sipped her coffee slowly, her eyes narrowing. She recognized the name Diane when Sloane said it. Remembered the woman upstairs, frail but dignified, who had thanked her with such sincerity it left a mark. Leah excused herself and walked into the corridor. She texted her friend Harper, who happened to be filming some behind-the-scenes B-roll for a hospital volunteer video. Within minutes, Harper had crept back into the cafeteria, camera lens poking from the strap of her tote bag. Devlin and Sloane kept talking, oblivious. Their voices grew sharper, louder. "I'm not splitting anything if she changes the will. You saw how she's been lately. Spaced out, paranoid." Sloane smirked. "Then we better hope she doesn't wake up." The words landed in the air like gunfire. The camera caught it all. Upstairs, my body lay still, unconscious. But my soul, my sense of self, was beginning to claw its way back from something deeper than anesthesia. The surgery lasted 3 hours. A small clot had threatened the outcome, but the doctors managed it. They saved my heart. Pity they couldn't save what it loved. When I woke, the room was dim. Evening had begun to stretch shadows across the floor. A soft buzzing filled the silence, machines monitoring a heart that refused to break, no matter how much it had been bruised. At my side sat Clara Whitmore. Her presence was unexpected, like the return of something you thought you'd lost, an old coat, a forgotten melody. Clara and I had met 30 years ago in a grief group, shortly after my mother died. She was one of the few people who ever saw me beneath the titles of wife and mother. Our friendship had drifted when she moved to Maine, but we spoke occasionally. Cards, holiday calls. She was my last true friend. "Hey, Di," she whispered. Her hand was already holding mine. I blinked back the haze. "Clara, you came." She nodded, her face unreadable, but her other hand held her phone. She tapped the screen, then held it out. "Don't say anything, just listen." And I did. I listened to my children plot my death like it was a chess move. I heard Devlin's voice, sharp with entitlement. Sloane's, slick with indifference. The laughter, the callousness, the sheer audacity. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, but something inside me, something maternal, something sacred, withered. Clara sat silently as I processed it. When the recording ended, she finally spoke. "You deserve better, Di, even now, especially now." I turned away from the screen and stared at the ceiling. The scalpel had cut into my body. Their words had cut deeper. The hospital room was too quiet after Clara left. The monitors still beeped, the IV still dripped, but everything else felt unnaturally still, like the world was holding its breath. I lay there with her phone still in my lap, the recording playing over in my mind on a loop I couldn't shut off. Devlin's voice, Sloane's tone, their words, that laughter, the grotesque calculus of what they'd gain when I died. I should have been shocked, but what I felt was worse. A numb kind of recognition. Like I'd always known, deep down, but had chosen not to know. A slow poison I'd drunk willingly, sip by sip. Clara's words before she left still hung in the air like smoke. "Is this the legacy you wanted?" Number God, no. I turned my face into the pillow and let out a sound I hadn't made in years. Not quite a sob, more like a cracked exhale. My chest seized, my stomach tightened, my hands curled into fists around the scratchy hospital blanket. I couldn't cry, not properly. It was as if even my grief had to ask permission. The flood came in fragments, in memory shards. I saw Paul standing in the kitchen, staring at me like I'd failed some invisible test. I'd asked if he could watch the kids so I could take a night class. He didn't shout, he never did, just raised one brow and said, "I married a mother, not a dropout." And I'd smiled, apologized, let the moment slide. Another part of me buried. Later, when Sloane was 15 and begged to spend spring break with her friend's family in Italy, I hesitated. Money was tight. Devlin's braces, car insurance, bills piling up. Paul said, "Don't punish her because your life is small." So I took money from my emergency fund and sent her off with new luggage. I watched her plane disappear into the clouds and told myself this was what love looked like. Sacrifice, even when it scrapes you raw. But it wasn't love. It was submission dressed as duty. And worse, I'd passed it down like a cursed heirloom. I raised my children to survive a house ruled by silence and subtlety. Devlin learned that dominance gets rewarded. Sloane learned that affection was a currency, not a right. I taught them, without meaning to, that power was love's twin. That approval was earned, not given. That mothers were fixtures, unseen until they broke. I hadn't been a mother, I'd been a blueprint, and they'd built themselves in the image of Paul. That night, after the nurse helped me to the bathroom and dimmed the lights, I asked for a pen and a notepad. Something quiet stirred in my chest. Grief, yes, but not the flailing kind. This was something colder, sharper, resolve. I began to write, not about the surgery or my children, not at first. I started with the small humiliations. The way Paul would correct my grammar at dinner parties, the way Devlin once called me dramatic when I cried after my dog died, the way Sloane rolled her eyes when I told her I missed her. Each memory had a weight, and as I poured them onto the page, I felt my chest lighten. "You weren't imagining it," I wrote. "You didn't deserve it. You are allowed to be angry." It became a nightly ritual. Between rounds of pain medication and interrupted sleep, I wrote until my hands cramped. The journal filled fast. Page after page, ink bleeding like confession. A week later, back home, I climbed the stairs to the attic, against Clara's advice, against my better judgment. The doctor said to rest, but rest wasn't what I needed. I needed answers. I needed to see. The attic was cluttered, untouched since Paul died. Old Christmas lights, broken furniture, boxes marked tax and photos. Dust swirled in the shaft of light coming through the skylight. I hadn't been up here in years. In the corner was a mirror, tall, silver-framed, and cracked clean across the center. I remembered that mirror. It had stood in our bedroom when we first married. Paul insisted we move it up here after the crack appeared, said it made the room look messy. I'd found the break poetic even then. I knelt in front of it, my reflection fractured into a dozen jagged versions of me, each one slightly misaligned, one with worry lines deeper than I remembered, one with lips too thin, one with tears brimming but unfallen. It was all me, every version, every scar. I reached out, fingertips brushing the glass. Cold, unforgiving, honest. This mirror had seen me undress for decades, had watched me cry in silence, watched me age while pretending I wasn't afraid. And now, it showed me exactly who I was. A woman who had survived, but at what cost? In that moment, something settled in my bones. Not peace, not yet, but clarity. I would not leave this world with my truth untold. I would not let Devlin and Sloane inherit anything more than what they'd already taken. I would not die a background character in their story. They had stripped me of dignity in whispers. I would reclaim it in ink. And so I wrote. Every day, every night, the mirror remained in the attic, a relic of reflection. But I stopped fearing it. The day after the storm cleared and the sun returned in half-hearted shades of gray, I pulled a thick quilt over my knees and sat by the fireplace, the original copy of my will spread open like a map I could no longer read. The embossed folder, with its legal precision and cold assurances, felt alien in my lap. I stared at the signatures, the witnesses, the neat division of assets, the beach house, the trust fund, the jewelry box my mother gave me when I turned 18. The document had once brought me comfort, a sign that I had done the responsible thing, that I was leaving order behind. Now it read like a curse. I closed it and pressed my hand over the cover. My fingers trembled. It wasn't the distribution that frightened me. It was the silence embedded between the lines, the silence of what I was really passing down. Money is the least dangerous thing we inherit. I thought back to my father's funeral decades ago. I was 16. It was a gray November morning, and the church smelled of old hymnals and damp wood. My mother sat in the front pew, dry-eyed, back straight as a board. She didn't speak during the service. She didn't cry. She simply gripped the edge of her purse like it was the only thing keeping her anchored. Afterward, in the kitchen, she told me, "Men like your father are to be remembered, not questioned." Then she handed me a plate of deviled eggs and told me to make myself useful. I obeyed, and just like that, I learned the lesson. Grief should be silent, obedience is survival, and love is proved through service, not through words, not through warmth. I didn't cry at his funeral either. I thought I was being strong. Now I realize I was just continuing the pattern. Paul didn't attend that funeral with me. He said he had a meeting he couldn't reschedule. I didn't argue. I didn't even flinch. Because somewhere inside, I had already accepted that his priorities weren't my grief. It took me a lifetime to understand. Trauma doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers through generations, passed down like fine china, beautiful, brittle, and unspoken. I opened the will again and read it slowly, line by line. I saw my mistakes etched into the formality. I had split everything between Devlin and Sloane, evenly and efficiently. But I had left the most toxic piece intact, the assumption that they were owed something by default. What if inheritance isn't just property? What if it's the entitlement I allowed them to breathe in like air? What if the very act of passing it all down is the last sin I can still prevent? I called Clara the next morning. She arrived with coffee, thick glasses perched on her nose, and a worn legal pad tucked under her arm. I want to change it, I said before she could ask. The will, all of it. She didn't flinch. She just nodded and sat down. Tell me everything. We spent hours at the kitchen table. I poured out the story in pieces, the betrayal, the cafeteria recording, the way their love had curdled into strategy. Clara listened, occasionally scribbling notes. Her silence was weighty but never dismissive. I trusted her in a way I didn't trust most people. She had always been a mirror, not a mask. As she flipped through the old will and began outlining options, I asked, "Is it wrong to leave it to someone else? Someone who's not family?" She looked up at me with that old, steady fire in her gaze. "Diane, family is not blood. Family is who shows up when it matters." That stayed with me. We began a draft of the new will. I outlined what I wanted to give, what I wanted to protect. But when Clara asked who I wanted as beneficiaries, I hesitated. "I don't know yet," I whispered. "Then leave it blank for now," she said gently. "The right names will come when you're ready." I tucked the half-written draft into a drawer beside my journal. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel buried. I felt in motion. Later that week, Clara invited me to coffee at a quiet cafe just outside town. The air was crisp, the sun unusually warm for the season. When I arrived, Clara was already seated, her hand resting lightly on the shoulder of a young woman. "This is Avery," Clara said, standing. Avery was 28, maybe 30. Short chestnut hair, pale blue eyes, freckles scattered across her nose like constellations. She wore a nurse's uniform beneath a soft wool cardigan. Her smile was small, unsure. "She's the hospice nurse who helped me when my sister passed," Clara continued. "And she was there the day of your surgery. You probably don't remember." I didn't, but Avery did. "You were having a panic attack right before they wheeled you in," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "You kept repeating, 'I'm not ready, I'm not ready.' I held your hand until you calmed down." I stared at her, stunned. That moment had been lost to me, swallowed by sedation and fear. But now it returned, vividly. The hand, the calm, the small miracle of human touch. "I didn't even know your name," I said. She smiled again, this time a little warmer. "You thanked me, even through the oxygen mask. You said, 'You remind me that not everyone is cruel.' That stuck with me." A hush fell between us. There it was, a thread of connection not forged by blood, but by choice, by kindness. After coffee, I stood beside my car, watching Avery walk away. Clara came up beside me and said, "Sometimes the people who save us are the ones we're not looking for." I didn't say anything, but the next morning I opened the drawer and looked at the blank lines in the will, and for the first time, I imagined writing down a name that wasn't Devlin. That wasn't Sloane. I imagined writing Avery. The day began with the subtle shift of something disturbed. I came downstairs to find Devlin in my study, rifling through the bottom drawer of my desk, the one where the original will had always been kept, wrapped in a blue ribbon, encased in a leather folio. It had been moved days ago, of course, tucked into a much safer, far less obvious place. But I hadn't told him that. Looking for something? I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. Devlin straightened up like a child caught red-handed, but his face quickly morphed into that familiar smirk, the one that always said, "You can't touch me." I was just looking for the house deed, he lied easily, brushing off invisible lint from his sleeve. You mentioned refinancing. I hadn't. I hadn't said anything of the sort. Before I could respond, Sloane appeared behind him, arms crossed, lips pursed. She glanced around the study, then at me, eyes scanning for something she wasn't saying. "Did you move the will?" she asked casually, too casually. I sat down slowly in the leather chair, leveling my gaze at both of them. Why would I need to move it? She shrugged. Just noticed it wasn't where it usually is. I smiled, thin and brittle. That's assuming it's your business to know where it is. The silence that followed was weighted, suffocating. Devlin stuffed his hands into his pockets, and Sloane diverted her gaze to the bookshelf. But I saw it. The calculation in her jaw, the irritation twitching at the corner of his mouth. They weren't worried about me. They were worried about what I might do. That night, I couldn't sleep. The memory came without invitation. Devlin, age 10, standing in the kitchen next to a shattered vase, one of the expensive ones Paul had brought home from Tokyo. His lip trembled, not with fear, but with fury. "Sloane did it," he said without hesitation. Sloane, 8 at the time, walked in moments later and immediately denied it. But Paul didn't believe her. Her voice was too calm, too precise. I had watched the whole thing. I knew the truth. But I said nothing, because Paul had already decided, and challenging him meant conflict, tension, a war I couldn't afford to wage. So I told myself the lie all mothers whisper, they'll forgive me someday. But lies have roots. That moment set a precedent. Devlin learned that dominance, delivered with confidence, could rewrite history. Sloane learned that silence was a shield, that the game was rigged unless you played dirty. And I learned to look away, again and again. Now, watching them grown, entitled, so sure of what they were owed, I saw not just their flaws, but my fingerprints on all of it. I had loved them with every breath. I had defended them, fed them, shielded them, but now I wasn't sure if I had mothered them or merely sponsored them. The thought gutted me. Was I ever truly their mother or just a resource? They visited again the next evening under the pretense of checking in after the surgery. I invited them to stay for dinner, determined to examine them like strangers I needed to understand for the first time. I roasted chicken with lemon and thyme, Devlin's favorite, set the table with cloth napkins just like I used to, lit the tall candles in the center, the illusion of warmth. They arrived late. Devlin made a show of bringing wine, though he never poured it. Sloane complained about the traffic before commenting on my appearance. "You look pale," she said. "Maybe you shouldn't be cooking." "I'm fine," I replied. "Besides, it's just dinner." We sat in a triangle of tension. Forks clicked against plates. Small talk dissolved quickly into passive aggression. "You really should think about downsizing," Devlin said between bites. "This house is too big for you now." I smiled. "That's not your decision to make." "It's not about control," he said, not hiding the edge in his voice. "It's about practicality." Sloane chimed in. "And legacy. I mean, none of this will matter if you don't have a plan in place." "I have a plan," I said simply. They fell silent. I could feel their restraint cracking beneath the surface. "What kind of plan?" Sloane finally asked, her tone feigning casual curiosity. "The kind that protects me from assumptions." Devlin put his fork down. "You changed it, didn't you?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. They knew. The rest of dinner passed in silence. When they left, they didn't hug me, just polite nods, and when the door clicked shut behind them, I finally exhaled. The air in the house felt clearer, cooler. That night, I retrieved the signed, rewritten will from its hiding spot inside the back panel of the linen cabinet. The ink had dried. The pages were crisp and final. I dressed in my coat, pulled on gloves, and drove in the dark to the bank. The parking lot was deserted. The security guard nodded as I passed, unaware of what I was carrying. I had rented the safety deposit box that morning under my maiden name. When the steel door clicked shut around the envelope, a wave of relief washed over me. Clean, decisive. I didn't know them answers. I owed myself peace. And now I had it. Locked away. Safe. A different kind of inheritance was finally taking shape. The first time Avery knocked on my door after the hospital, I didn't recognize her. She wore jeans and a thick cable-knit sweater, her hair pulled back, no ID badge clipped to her shirt, no clipboard in hand, just a paper bag with scones and a jar of honey. "I figured you might not be up for cooking," she said, her voice as calm as I remembered. "And Clara said you like blackberry jam, but the store only had honey." I stared at her for a moment, unsure of how to receive kindness without a transactional edge. Then I opened the door and let her in. That afternoon, we sat on the porch in silence, watching the sky shift from dull gray to soft lilac. She didn't fill the quiet with noise. She didn't offer unsolicited wisdom. She simply existed beside me, and somehow that was enough. Over the next few weeks, she came by regularly. Sometimes she brought groceries, sometimes nothing at all. We talked in the shallow end at first. Books, weather, coffee preferences. But then the deeper layers began to surface. She told me about growing up in the foster system. 4 homes before I was 10. She said one morning as we sat in the kitchen, peeling apples for a pie neither of us really intended to eat. "You learn early not to get too comfortable anywhere." I watched her hands move methodically with the peeler, steady, precise. "Is that why you became a nurse?" She shrugged. "I guess. I like the idea of being the person who stays, even just for a moment. When you're sick or scared, someone has to anchor you." I remembered that feeling, hazy and surreal, when I'd been wheeled toward the operating room, my heart galloping, my breath tight in my chest. I'd been slipping into panic, the edges of the world curling like burned paper, and then a hand. "Heron, you were the one who helped me," I murmured, the memory crystallizing. "Before surgery." She nodded. "You looked so scared. You kept saying, I can't do this. I just held your hand. I didn't know what else to do." Sometimes that's all it takes. One hand, one voice that doesn't tell you to be strong, doesn't shame your fear. Still, I couldn't ignore the voice in my head whispering doubt. Was I projecting something onto her? A daughter I wished I'd had? Was my loneliness shaping this connection into something it wasn't? But then she offered something no one else had in years: presence without expectation. One sunny afternoon, she showed up with gardening gloves and a tray of seedlings. "I thought we could start a small bed," she said, gesturing toward the patch of neglected earth by the fence. "Marigolds, lavender, maybe a few herbs." I blinked at her, stunned. "Why?" She tilted her head. "Because I think this house needs something living, and so do you." So we dug into the soil. Our hands grew filthy, our knees sore. She teased me for being too gentle with the roots. I teased her for planting the rosemary crooked. We laughed, full, unrestrained laughter that startled me with its warmth. It was the first time in months I hadn't felt like I was waiting to be disappointed. Later, sitting on the grass with dirt under our nails, I looked at her and said, "You're not like anyone I've ever known." She smiled, wiping sweat from her brow. "You either." We both stared at the garden bed for a long time. A new beginning, one root at a time. It wasn't love, not yet, maybe not ever, but it was care, it was chosen closeness, and it was real. That night, she stayed for tea. As we sipped in the glow of the kitchen's pendant light, her voice softened. "There's something I should tell you." I set my cup down. "All right. During your surgery, Devlin came to the nurse's station. He was angry. Said we didn't have the authority to operate, that he wanted to override the DNR. My stomach dropped. Override. What? I checked your file. You never had a DNR. He knew that. She nodded. We told him it wasn't valid, that it wasn't on record. He backed off eventually, but it was clear he was trying to shut the whole thing down. I sat there, stunned. He tried to stop the surgery? I think he was hoping it wouldn't work, she said carefully. I didn't want to tell you then, but I think you deserve the truth now. A sharp chill crawled through my chest. Not because I was surprised, but because I wasn't. This wasn't some melodramatic betrayal. It was confirmation of what had been slowly taking shape in the shadow of my memories. Devlin wasn't just indifferent. He was dangerous in the most banal, bloodless way, with entitlement and convenience cloaked in the respectability of a polished man with a good handshake. And yet, here across from me sat a woman with no obligation to care. A woman who had saved me with a hand, who helped me plant life into dead soil, who came back not because she had to, but because she wanted to. Avery saw me, not as a relic, not as a transaction, as a person, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough to begin again. The wind was rattling the window panes again. Another storm, this one quieter than the last but more insidious, the kind that didn't announce itself with thunder, only with the sound of trees bending and gutters groaning. It was almost midnight. The house creaked around me like a restless sleeper, and I sat alone in the study, the revised will laid out on the desk like a confession. A single candle flickered beside it, casting long, wraith-like shadows against the bookshelf. I watched the way the flame bent and danced, how it illuminated my face in the dark glass of the window. My reflection looked haunted. An older woman, weary but still holding on. A woman questioning her right to finally make a choice not shaped by guilt. I touched the pen beside the will. My fingers trembled slightly, not from fear exactly, but from the weight of the moment. Was I doing the right thing? Not the polite thing, not the expected thing, the right thing. Guilt pressed its cold hands against my shoulders. Images rose unbidden. Devlin as a child racing through the sprinkler in the backyard, his laughter loud and bright. Sloane at her fifth-grade recital, clinging to my hand before stepping onto the stage. I had loved them through everything, their pain, their joy, their failures. But love doesn't absolve harm, and motherhood doesn't negate memory. I reached for my phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in nearly a decade. "Dr. Geller," came the voice, groggy but professional. "It's Diane," I said. "I'm sorry for calling so late. I didn't know who else to talk to." There was a pause, and then warmth bloomed through the line. "Diane, I'm glad you called." We spoke for nearly an hour. I told her everything about the surgery, the recording, the revised will, Avery, about the internal split tearing through me like fault lines, justice on one side, guilt on the other. "I keep asking myself if this makes me a bad mother," I whispered. She paused, then answered softly, "Maybe it makes you a mother for the first time to yourself." After we hung up, I stayed at the desk until the candle burned down to a stub. Then I rose, folded the will into its envelope, and slid it back into the drawer. I wasn't ready to sign it. Not yet, not until I spoke to them. The next day, I asked Devlin to come by in the afternoon. Alone. He arrived late, dressed in a button-down shirt and cologne that smelled expensive and empty. He didn't hug me. He never did. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table. The same table where I'd once spooned applesauce into his mouth, where he'd done school projects with glitter and glue. Now it felt like a witness to something colder. "I know you tried to stop the surgery," I said. He blinked, taken aback but not shocked. "I didn't—" "Don't lie to me, Devlin. Not today." His jaw tightened. "I didn't think it was the right decision. You didn't seem mentally fit to consent." "I wasn't dying. I was scared." He shrugged, eyes hard. "I was trying to protect your assets. If something went wrong—" "There it is," I said quietly. "My body was just a gate you needed to get through." His silence was confirmation. "I'm changing the will," I said flatly. "I'm not asking for your blessing. I'm just telling you." He stood abruptly, pushing the chair back. "You're punishing us because we weren't perfect? Because we saw you clearly?" "No," I said, voice calm. "I'm doing it because for once in my life I want peace, and that doesn't live with you." He left without another word. That evening I invited Sloane. She arrived with a bottle of wine and false warmth. She hugged me, made a show of setting the table even though I hadn't asked her to. Over roasted chicken and potatoes, we danced around the subject until I finally said, "I listened to the recording." Her fork paused mid-air, then slowly lowered to the plate. I was angry, she said. It was a bad moment. It wasn't one moment, it was a mirror. She leaned back, exhaled. You gave us everything, but you never asked us to be good. You asked us to succeed. I asked you to be decent. No, she corrected gently. You assumed we would be, if you gave us enough. That's not the same. I stared at her, truly saw her, her poise, her detachment. A daughter raised in a house where affection was rare and ambition was applauded. I had taught her silence was survival. She just took it to heart. I loved you more than I loved myself, I whispered. And that's part of the problem, she replied. You made yourself invisible, and now you resent us for never seeing you. We didn't fight. We didn't cry. We just sat in the aftermath of unspoken years, and when she left, she kissed my cheek. But there was no reconciliation, only truth. That night, as the wind howled again outside, I took the will from the drawer, lit a fresh candle, sat down at the desk. The pen felt heavier than before. Or maybe I was stronger. I signed it. Avery Bennett now stood in the space where bloodlines used to live. The shadows on the wall didn't dance anymore. They simply watched. And for the first time in my life, I wrote my name beside a decision that was mine alone. The call came just after dawn. The sun hadn't yet broken the horizon, and the house was still cloaked in the hush of pre-morning. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, the screen casting a pale glow against the wall. I didn't recognize the number, but the voice on the other end didn't need to introduce itself. It was Clara's niece. Clara was gone. A stroke, they said. Quick. Unmercifully swift. She hadn't suffered, at least. There were no goodbyes, no drawn-out final moments. One moment she was here, and the next, she was part of the silence. I hung up and sat in bed for a long time, unmoving. The blankets were heavy with her absence. My hands felt useless, as if grief had stripped them of function. Clara wasn't just a friend, she was a witness. She was the one person who had seen the whole of me without flinching. She knew my shame, my regret, my softness, and she held them all without judgment. Now the house felt colder than ever. Later that morning, I opened the drawer in the study where she kept papers during her visits. Among spare reading glasses and half-used legal pads was an envelope with my name written in her tight looping script. Inside was a letter. Diane, if you're reading this, I'm not there anymore. I hated goodbyes, so I'll skip that part. Just remember this. We are not what they made us. We choose again. Every day, you chose to see. That makes you brave. Keep going. Clara. I held the letter to my chest and let the tears come. Slow, steady, silent. The kind of grief that doesn't scream but seeps into your bones. Clara's funeral was modest, just the way she would have wanted. A small chapel on the edge of town, sun filtering through stained glass like softened memory. The pews were lined with quiet mourners, former clients, neighbors, the odd student she'd mentored long ago. Sloane spoke at the service. Her voice was measured, her posture flawless. She wore a navy dress and matching gloves, her words carefully curated. Clara was strong, decisive, a woman of logic and precision. That was it. No warmth, no story, just a resume of the dead. Avery sat beside me, her hand resting lightly on my knee. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her presence grounded me, the way Clara once had. After the service, I returned home alone. The air inside the house had shifted. Grief rearranges things, not just emotionally, but physically. Objects felt different now. Rooms echoed with the absence of the one person who had helped me rebuild. I wandered the hallway, pausing at every photo like they were tombstones. Devlin in his graduation robe, Sloane with her first art award, Paul and I on our wedding day, both too young to know the years would chisel us into strangers. I took the albums down one by one and carried them to the attic, not to discard, but to release. I didn't need daily reminders of a life that had already burned through its meaning. Then I found the letters. In the back of the linen closet, behind a stack of old holiday decorations, there was a weathered box marked P in my handwriting. I didn't remember putting it there. Inside were yellowed envelopes, brittle with time. One caught my eye. Paul's handwriting, bold, declarative. It was his original will. I sat on the floor, the paper trembling in my hands as I read it. He had left everything to Devlin, not Devlin and Sloan, just Devlin. To my son, Devlin James Whitaker, I leave the full estate, as he is best positioned to manage the family's future holdings. It was dated the year before he died. I had challenged it back then, insisted on a revision. He relented, mostly because he was too sick to argue. The lawyer rewrote it in a joint version, defaulting to me as the executor. I'd completely forgotten, but now I remembered something else, a conversation with Devlin months after the funeral. We were in the kitchen, and he asked where Paul's will was kept. I'd thought it was just curiosity, even flattery. Wanting to understand how things worked, he'd said. Now I knew better. He had seen it. He had always known. He believed that legacy belonged to him because once it had, and he had counted on my memory fading, my sentimentality winning. He had banked on my grief being blind, my hands curled into fists around the paper. Not in rage, but in clarity. He hadn't just assumed he'd inherit everything. He had been promised it by a man who trained him to believe love and power were the same thing. That night, I lit a fire in the fireplace for the first time in years. Not for warmth, for ceremony. One by one, I burned the old letters. The ones Paul wrote that made me feel small. The ones I wrote but never sent. The fragments of apology I had scribbled in the dark, always meant for someone else's forgiveness. I fed them to the flames without fanfare. Letting go is not a grand act. It is slow, repetitive, like pruning dead branches every season until the tree remembers how to bloom. The house felt lighter afterward. I woke up before the sun, the kitchen bathed in the pale blue hush of early morning. I tied my robe tighter and opened the pantry, reaching for the flour, the sugar, the cinnamon tucked behind a half-used box of cereal. Every movement felt rehearsed, muscle memories steeped in decades of ritual. Pancakes, just like when they were little. Back then, Saturday mornings were sacred. Devlin and Sloan rubbing sleep from their eyes, dragging their blankets to the table, fighting over who got the first one off the skillet. I used to shape them into animals, add blueberries for eyes. They'd giggle, smear syrup on their cheeks, ask for seconds. Now the silence stretched thin around me, broken only by the sizzle of batter hitting the pan. The table was already set. Plates, napkins, coffee, the good mugs, one final attempt at familiarity before the fracture. They arrived 5 minutes apart, Devlin first, walking in with that clipped stride and phone already in hand. Sloan followed, in heels far too sharp for morning. No embrace, no small talk, just quiet, anticipatory glances. "Smells good," Sloan said, sitting down. Devlin added, "You're cooking? Should you be on your feet?" "I'm not dead yet," I replied, sliding a plate in front of him. He chuckled, but the sound didn't reach his eyes. I sat last across from them both, the plate of pancakes steaming in the center of the table. We began to eat, or at least move food around. The silence thickened, heavy with what we weren't saying. It didn't take long for Devlin to break it. "So, what's this about?" I met his gaze. Calm, steady. "I wanted to have breakfast, one last time." Sloan narrowed her eyes. "One last time?" I nodded. "There's something you should know. Something I need to say before it's too late." They waited. Devlin leaned back in his chair. Sloan crossed her arms. "I've changed the will." The words landed like a dropped plate, sharp, sudden, final. Devlin sat forward. "You what? It no longer goes to either of you." He laughed, dry and mocking. "Is this a joke?" "No." Sloane's voice was barely above a whisper. "Why?" I folded my hands in my lap. "Because I can't reward cruelty. Because love is not an entitlement. And because I've spent a lifetime being silent to keep the peace, and I won't die quiet." Devlin stood abruptly, shoving the chair back. "Unbelievable. You're punishing us for not being perfect. For not— What? For growing up?" "I'm not punishing you," I said. "I'm acknowledging reality." "You owe us," he snapped, "after everything we've given up." "What did you give up?" I asked, voice rising now. What exactly have you lost, Devlin? Your time? A few polite phone calls? I gave you my body, my life, and when I needed love, you gave me strategy. He stared at me, stunned. Sloane cleared her throat. This isn't fair. We're your children. And I'll always be your mother, I said, but that doesn't mean I have to be your benefactor. A pause. Then Sloane asked quietly, what did I do wrong? I blinked, the question sharper than Devlin's shouting. You let me believe that affection was enough, that visits and flowers could erase the coldness in your voice, that your civility was care. I never meant to hurt you, she said, softer now. I thought you understood. I did, I replied. That was the problem. I understood too well. Devlin grabbed his coat from the back of the chair. This is insane. No, I said. This is clarity. He opened the door. You'll regret this. I already have. For years. And then he was gone, the screen door slamming behind him like an exclamation point. Sloane stayed. She didn't speak, just sat, her fingers idly tracing the rim of her coffee mug. I'm sorry, she said eventually. I thought if I kept it polite, I wouldn't have to go deeper. I don't hate you, I said, but I won't keep pretending this was ever about love. She nodded slowly, then stood, adjusted her coat. As she walked to the door, she turned back. So who gets it? Avery. A flicker of something crossed her face. Surprise, confusion, perhaps even relief. She's not family. She showed up when it mattered. Sloane didn't argue. She simply opened the door, stepped into the morning light, and left without looking back. I cleared the table in silence. The pancakes sat untouched, syrup congealing on porcelain. I wasn't angry anymore, just free. 6 months passed like a slow tide, pulling the pain back little by little until what remained wasn't devastation, but a softened imprint of what once hurt. The seasons had turned, and so had I. Avery and I moved into a smaller home, a single-story cottage with ivy crawling over the porch rails and a bright red door that reminded me of something cheerful, something daring. The rooms were smaller but warmer. The sunlight poured in through the east-facing windows every morning, golden and easy. I painted the walls myself, soft eggshell and pale green. Avery hung wind chimes near the back door. We built new rituals in that house. Sunday morning pancakes, not shaped like animals this time, but made together, laughing over whose batter was better. We planted more herbs and even a lemon tree in the backyard, though the neighbors warned us it might not thrive in our climate. We did it anyway. Sometimes we danced in the kitchen when the radio played something from the 70s. Sometimes we sat in silence with books and tea, and it felt like enough. I didn't call it healing. I didn't call it anything. I just let it be. I started volunteering at the local library. It was quiet work, shelving, checking out books, recommending memoirs to hesitant teenagers. One afternoon, a little girl asked me if stories could be true and made up at the same time. I told her that sometimes the truth needs fiction to feel safe. Later that night, I opened my laptop and began writing my memoir. Not for publication, just for me. The words came slowly at first, then in torrents. I wrote about Paul, about Clara, about raising children I both loved and mourned. I wrote about the silence that smothered me and the voice I'd finally chosen to reclaim. Devlin and Sloane never reached out. Not once. No calls, no letters, no holidays. I saw Sloane's name in a digital art magazine once, and Devlin's firm made headlines for some shady business merger. That was all. I mourned them still. Not for who they were, but for who they might have been. I missed the possibility of them more than the people they'd become, but I no longer regretted the choice. The grief was still there, but dulled, like an old scar I could touch without wincing. Then came the letter from the court. Devlin had filed a suit, contesting the will, claiming I was coerced, mentally unstable, and unduly influenced by a non-relative caregiver. The language was cruel, calculated. It dripped with entitlement, as if he believed he could still mold the truth with enough paperwork. I didn't panic. I didn't even flinch. Avery, on the other hand, quietly opened a folder she'd kept hidden since the day I told her about the will. It held a copy of the hospital cafeteria recording. and a statement from Nurse Leah, who'd witnessed Devlin's attempt to interfere with my medical decisions during surgery. When the day came, I didn't go to the hearing. I didn't need to. Avery stood in front of the judge, composed and unshaken, and played the tape. The courtroom fell silent as Devlin's voice echoed from the speakers, entitled Smug, Callous. "I'm saying we can't be stupid. She's been hanging around that friend of hers. Clara. You don't think Clara's whispering in her ear?" And then Sloane's, "Then we better hope she doesn't wake up." The judge threw the case out within minutes. There was no discussion, no appeal. When Avery told me over tea that evening, I nodded once. "Are you okay?" she asked. "Yes," I said, because it never really was about the money. She understood. She always did. That night, I wrote another page in the memoir. It ended with a single line. "Some things are worth walking away from, even when they carry your name." I didn't write about Devlin again. Instead, I wrote about the garden, the way the lemon tree had survived the frost, and how its first bloom filled the whole yard with the scent of second chances. Because sometimes what we plant late in life grows stronger roots. It was late spring when I found my sister again. Eleanor had vanished from our lives nearly 30 years ago after she left her husband. A scandal, our mother had called it, one that couldn't be forgiven. Back then, Eleanor tried to explain that it wasn't just a failed marriage, but an escape. He was cruel in ways that weren't visible. And like me, she had been taught to stay, to smooth, to swallow. I hadn't defended her. I'd watched her pack her bags and disappear from family gatherings, holiday photos, and eventually, memory. I believed what I was told, that she was dramatic, selfish, reckless. Now I knew better. I found her through a friend of Clara's who ran a community center in Oregon. She worked there part-time, teaching art classes to children. Her hair had gone white, but her laugh, when she recognized my voice, sounded exactly the same. When we met at a small cafe near her apartment, we just sat across from each other for a long time, eyes soaking in decades of absence. "I almost didn't come," she said, wrapping her hands around a chipped ceramic mug. "I wasn't sure what you wanted from me." "Just to begin again," I said. She blinked, and then her hand covered mine. That's all I ever wanted back then, too. We talked for hours, about our childhood, about the silent codes we'd lived under, about the men who shaped us, and the mothers who taught us to accept it. "I thought I was the only one," I whispered. "You weren't," she said. "You just stayed longer." That afternoon, something shifted in me. An understanding that healing doesn't always start with grand gestures. Sometimes it begins with shared silence, with the way two sisters finally say "I'm sorry" without needing to speak the words aloud. In the weeks that followed, Eleanor visited our new home twice. She and Avery got along instantly. They shared stories over garden work and lemon tea. Avery was curious about Eleanor's past, but never pried. Eleanor said she reminded her of herself when she still believed in possibility. One morning, I invited them both to visit Clara's gravesite with me. The cemetery was quiet, blanketed in birdsong and the low hum of wind rustling through oak trees. Clara's stone was simple, just like her. Clara Whitmore. We choose again. Avery held a bouquet of tulips in one hand, Eleanor a single sunflower. I brought a sapling, just a young fig tree in a biodegradable pot. Clara had always wanted one in her yard, but her soil hadn't been right. We knelt together, planted it near her stone. I pressed the dirt with my palms, grounding it into the earth. "I hope she knows," I said. "She does," Avery said gently. We stood there for a long time, the three of us. Three women from different roots, different pain, joined by choice and compassion rather than obligation. I looked at Avery, then at Eleanor, and I understood something in my marrow. Family is not who shares your blood. It's who shares your burden, who shows up, who stays. Blood can bind, yes, but it can also bruise. What matters more is who holds the pieces after the shattering. I had spent so much of my life believing I had to earn love, through silence, through sacrifice, through being what others needed me to be. But Clara, Eleanor, Avery, they loved me for who I was when I had nothing left to give. That night, I wrote in my memoir, "Family is not a birthright. It is a choice." made over and over again in the quiet acts of care, in the moments no one sees. And in those moments, we become more than survivors. We become new. The fig sapling stood straight and green beside Clara's grave. New life, rooted in memory, chosen, not inherited. The garden had come alive in a way I hadn't thought possible. Where once there was bare earth and overgrown weeds, now marigolds flared bright beside lavender stalks and rosemary bushes. The lemon tree we'd planted had taken root, its branches heavier with small, stubborn fruits than anyone predicted. A fig tree stood in the back corner, a quiet promise next to Clara's headstone in my memory, its twin here in our soil. I stepped barefoot onto the porch, coffee mug warm in my hands, the wooden boards cool beneath my feet. The morning sun stretched long golden arms across the lawn, kissing the blooms awake. Bees hovered, slow and purposeful. Somewhere in the distance, a mourning dove cooed. It was a soft kind of day, the kind that didn't ask anything from me. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I owed it anything either. I sat at the small writing desk near the back window, opened my laptop, and placed my fingers on the keys. The cursor blinked at the bottom of a manuscript I'd spent half a year stitching together in the quiet hours between garden work and library shifts, between evening tea with Avery and the occasional weekend visit from Eleanor. The story had become more than mine. It had become a reckoning written in ink and breath and slow reclamation. I reread the final paragraph and let the words settle before typing the last line. Sometimes the family you make is the one that heals you. I hit save. Behind me, soft piano music drifted from the living room. Avery had found the old upright at a flea market and restored it over 2 weekends. Now it sat in the corner of our home, worn but beautiful. She played often, nothing grand, just melodies that felt like warm water or a second heartbeat. I turned in my chair and watched her through the open archway. She didn't notice me. Her fingers moved with ease, her brow slightly furrowed in concentration. The song was unfamiliar, improvised maybe, but it fit the moment like it had always been part of it. I thought about all the ways I had come to this place, not just the geography, but the emotional terrain. The broken map I'd followed, the landmarks of loss, the dead ends, the unmarked roads. And yet here I was, whole in ways I hadn't been before. I missed Devlin and Sloane in fragments like echoes from another life. Sometimes, when I passed certain aisles in the store, I'd remember their favorite snacks. When I folded the laundry, I'd picture the tiny socks I once paired for them as toddlers. But the ache no longer felt like abandonment. It felt like release. Love, I'd come to understand, isn't always enough to hold people close. But it can be enough to let them go. Eleanor came by on Sundays now. She brought sketches of birds and wildflowers, kept in a leather notebook she claimed was just doodles, though Avery and I both knew better. She and I had rebuilt something fragile but honest, a kind of sisterhood born not from shared childhood, but shared survival. At night, when the sky deepened to velvet and the house settled into its hush, I would often sit on the porch and think about Clara. About the way her voice had never wavered, even when she was urging me toward the most terrifying kind of freedom. The freedom to choose differently. The fig tree had begun to lean toward the sun. So had I. One evening, Avery sat beside me, our shoulders touching lightly. We didn't speak, we didn't need to. She reached over, took my hand in hers, and gave it the gentlest squeeze. "I'm glad you stayed," she whispered. "I almost didn't," I replied. She smiled. "But you did." Yes, I did, and not just in body. I stayed in my truth. I stayed in the discomfort long enough to see what lived beyond it. I stayed in the hard conversations and the silent nights and the loneliness that came when I stripped my life of illusion. What I'd found wasn't comfort. It was something more durable, peace. I looked at the garden again. The lemon tree catching the wind, the herbs swaying in tandem, the bees still working unbothered. The quiet that surrounded me now wasn't empty. It was earned, it was mine, and I had chosen it. Not because someone else told me it was right, not because it made sense on paper, but because in the soft cadence of Avery's music, in the steady rise of new blooms, in the pages of a story that no longer hid behind denial, I had become someone worth saving, and I had done the saving myself. In the final line of my memoir, I wrote it clearly, no metaphor, no veil. I wasn't saved. I chose to be someone worth saving. And that truth, the one no one could contest, deny, or inherit, would outlive every will, every wound, and every silence that came before it. If this story moved you, challenged you, or reminded you of your own silent battles, don't keep it to yourself. Like, share, and comment below. What does family mean to you? Have you ever had to choose peace over blood? Subscribe for more real, raw, and unforgettable narratives, because some truths deserve to be heard no matter how uncomfortable they are.